Welcome to Beyond the Valley, a CNBC tech podcast with Arjun Kharpal and Tom Chitty.
Beyond the Valley.
By now, you're probably aware of the importance of semiconductors. They're in everything from smartphones to running shoes and are a vital component in the development of Gen AI. But you may not know that back in the 1980s, Japan occupied more than half of the global semiconductor market. Since then, however, other countries have led the way as they scramble to secure their chip supply chains. Now, Japan, with the backing of both government and business, is planning to revitalize their semiconductor industry and have begun a quest to develop the world's most advanced microchip.
Beyond the Valley.
Our guest this week is a senior analyst at the Economist Intelligence Unit. Created in 1946, the EIU, as it's otherwise known, is a research and analysis division of the Economist Group, the sister company to the Economist newspaper. He focuses on Northeast Asia, providing forecast and analysis on economic development, public policy, and international relations in the region. Fei Xue, thank you for joining Beyond the Valley.
Thank you. Glad to be here today.
Now, Fei, you have two master's degrees, I believe, one in comparative politics and the other in public policy. Makes perfect sense for your future career, or the career you have now. But your bachelor's degree was in Spanish language and literature, am I right?
Yeah, back in Beijing.
Okay, so the important question that we really want to ask is, how is your Spanish?
For now, not so good. I can barely order dishes in Spanish restaurant right now. I used to speak decent Spanish, but not anymore. But buenos dias, ¿cómo está?
Good. Brilliant. Well, let's get cracking. For our listeners, summarize how important semiconductors. I did it at the start, but just to give an understanding of kind of why people should care about what we're talking about today.
Yeah, essentially, semiconductors is more like a commodity nowadays, and we use this very small component everywhere in not only electronic devices, but also, like you said, even running shoes. We now use that to measure things, and eventually, I think because the moving trend of the world is a connection of everything together, and because of that, we need semiconductors for that to be achievable, and semiconductors, largely, there are two groups of it. One is logic chips, the other is memory chips. And logic chips is what we call processors. And memory chips is where we store data in it. They are the biggest segment of the semiconductor markets, and different. Each segment have their dominant powers in it. We will talk about it later.
Fantastic. Before we get to Arjun's stat of the week, we'll just do a little bit of housekeeping. So if you haven't already, you can subscribe to the Beyond the Valley weekly newsletter. Head to cnbc.com/Beyond the Valley. Click on the subscribe button, and you'll get a newsletter every Friday with all the best international tech stories from CNBC. And if you want to contact Arjun and I, or have a question about a past episode or this episode, then email us at beyondthevalley@cnbc.com. So before we get back to it, Arjun, stat of the week.
The stat of the week is $97 billion.
I'm actually going to write that down because I like to think about it as the...
Fei knows the answer.
Do you?
No, not yet.
Okay, give it one more time.
$97 billion. We'll come back to that at the end.
It's always billion.
Big numbers.
Something billion. Yeah, big numbers.
Yeah.
That's what we're all about. Okay, let's talk about specifically then Japan. Give us a little bit of background on Japan's semiconductor industry.
Japan used to be the pioneer of global semiconductor research and development. Like I said, at the end of 1980s, Japanese companies together accounted for like 51% of global semiconductor market. Why? Because in 1980, a consortium of Japanese companies, they made a breakthrough in terms of creating or developing the electron beam lithography technology in terms of making semiconductors much easier and at a cheaper price. And with the help from state funds and financing powers, they quickly take up most of the global share of semiconductors and become a powerhouse in that area. But also, like you said, after the 1980s, starting from 1990s, their market share quickly descended, and right now their collective market share is like below 10% in the world. And most of the semiconductors made in Japan are either specialty semiconductors related to especially automotive industry, or legacy semiconductors, which is bigger than 28 nanometers.
Fei, what was the changes that happened that meant that Japan lost some of its leadership? I know part of it was political, right? I think under the Reagan administration in the US, they imposed some very big tariffs on Japanese memory semiconductors, which effectively hurt. But were there other reasons as well?
Two big reasons. One is political, as you mentioned, the 100% semiconductor tariffs imposed by the U.S., but also from the U.S. In 1986, the U.S. and Japan signed the U.S.-Japan Semiconductor Agreement. Essentially, it set the bottom limit for Japanese-made semiconductors price sold in the U.S., but also it forcefully increased the share of foreign semiconductors sold in the Japanese market. So by doing this too, one thing is undercut Japanese semiconductor chip makers' competitiveness in the global market. Another thing is that it forced open Japanese semiconductor market to foreign players. And this creates opportunity for the US, South Korea, and Taiwan. Speaking of the latter two, around 1990s, there is a generational evolution in semiconductor development. It's the specialization in sector. So traditionally, one single company, a big company, take care of both chip design and also the manufacturing, which is the traditional Japanese model. But starting from 1990s, specialization made it possible for one company to focus on chip designing, which is a strong point for U.S. companies. And some companies start to just focus on manufacturing. So essentially, TSMC, the Taiwanese chip makers, is just a contractor. They focus on manufacturing semiconductors designed by whoever are the players. And that gave these all companies the opportunity to leapfrog Japanese companies by investing heavily into a certain specific segment or sector in this industry. And many of these Japanese semiconductor makers, they could not catch up with a huge amount of fixed investment, and the government support to the industry also declined a little bit. So that's why Japanese chip makers gradually lose competitiveness in the global market.
So just to summarize, I mean, quite a few things there. It was one, the politics, one, the sort of decline of investment, but also the increase in competitiveness of foreign players who were allowed to enter the market. But also, I think one of the biggest shifts, and you heard it, and if our listeners ever come across this, the fabless model, right? The rise of the fabless model. You probably hear these days about Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Co., or TSMC, who are the biggest semiconductor manufacturer in the world. You know, they're a big, I guess, beneficiary of this move for companies that wanted to not manufacture their own chips, but actually just design them and outsource that manufacturing to TSMC and others as well. And so that's one of the big shifts. What is happening now then, Fei, in terms of Japan's bid and desire to revive its own industry? What are they doing? What are they doing?
They are adopting a very comprehensive approach, I would say, and it's again state-led initiative, pooling together private sector resources and development capabilities. And at one hand, they want to step into the chip designing industry sector with a collaboration program with IBM in the US. But also they want to attract international investment in terms of semiconductor making or chip making, and to establish fabs in Japan's territory. And they have achieved a certain degree of success in early stages. They have attracted TSMC to establish fabs on the Kyushu Island, Kumamoto Prefecture. And TSMC has already said that they will set up the second fab there. And also Japanese 8 Japanese electronic companies put resources together to create a consortium called Rapidus, and with public finance or state funding support. And this consortium aimed to be able to make the most advanced semiconductors, 2 nanometers semiconductors by 2027. And that's what they are doing right now. So a comprehensive approach to target all segments in Japan.
For our listeners that don't know the difference between sort of 2 nanometers and 3 nanometers, and I believe that 40 nanometers is kind of where Japan's semiconductor industry is at the moment in terms of its producing of the best microchip it has. Yeah. But the leading microchip is 3 nanometers.
3 nanometers.
So when someone says 2 nanometers, it's like, well, it's just like 1 nanometer better, but it's vast. It's significant.
The difficulty of miniaturize the semiconductors increase exponentially by generation. It requires a lot of investment, a lot of research and development, and so it's hard. So and also not to mention that actually, according to Rapidus' latest plan to be able to make 2 nanometer semiconductors by 2027, they will already be behind the most advanced cutting-edge semiconductors at that time, because TSMC and Samsung already have plans to make 1.5 nanometer semiconductors by 2026. So another point is that actually some Japanese companies are trying to bypass this and to use a different set of technology, like on the back end in terms of chip packaging. Advanced chip packaging, so to stack chips together or to incorporate different types of chip to improve the performance of processors. Yeah, so they are trying to make a most advanced or miniature semiconductors on the one hand, but on the other hand, they are actively seeking different approach to improve chips performance.
Fei, why do we need to keep going smaller and smaller in terms of nanometers?
Because it will increase the usage or the usefulness of semiconductors, and also it will dramatically improve the performance of the processors. So simply put, that way.
I think one of the other fascinating things you said was that even when Rapidus, if it manages to commercialize 2 nanometers in 2027, it will still be behind the leading edge from TSMC and Samsung, etc. That's really the difficulty, right, for a lot of countries. They still, as much as they want to boost their own domestic industry, they're still going to rely heavily on production from TSMC and from Samsung, just because of naturally the amount of R&D these companies put in over the years, but so much of a head start they have as well.
Yeah, definitely. But to be fair, for Japanese companies, they are playing the catch-up role. They don't necessarily need to be able to make the most cutting-edge semiconductors, because there will be a huge market for legacy chips, and also the chips they are making can provide to domestic demand, and that will be a huge market for them to explore. And another issue is that even though TSMC and Samsung can make the most cutting-edge 1.5 nanometer semiconductors by 2026, their capacity won't be catch up to the demand. So there will still be a huge demand for even 2 nanometers semiconductors.
I think a lot of the semiconductors at the moment, the cutting edge ones, they're going into high-end smartphones, right? When you think about some of the smartphones from Apple, from Samsung as well, some of, I think, NVIDIA's GPUs are on slightly more advanced nodes as well. But actually, there's still a big market for legacy nodes, right? When you think about cars and various other areas, they don't need 3 nanometer chips necessarily in them.
No, not necessarily. Right now, I think for a lot of car specialty semiconductors, 28 is good enough. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that this has been driven, this revival, by the government, largely with support from business. How much of that is that this is a burgeoning industry that we need to be, leading, but also national security concerns?
Yeah, it's a very good question because this government initiative is not just targeting economic growth. Of course, this by reviving the semiconductor industry, Japanese government wants to provide another source of economic growth to the country by facilitating the development or revival again of supporting industries and technologies. However, semiconductors, like I said previously, has already commoditized in the global market, and it's become so critical to many advanced technology areas, including artificial intelligence, including various electronic devices, and even EVs, and it's an essential part of the global technology race, and all countries want to, or many countries want to gain a space in this niche area, and also they don't want to rely too much on foreign companies to do that. So they would like to establish domestic companies to at least be able to create and design manufacturing semiconductors for domestic uses. At the moment, we can see that the most cutting-edge semiconductors, 90% of these are manufactured by TSMC or Taiwanese players alone. The others are made by Samsung from South Korea, and a small amount are made by the US companies. So, yeah, Japanese companies, if they require these cutting-edge semiconductors, they have to rely on foreign supplies. Yeah, that's a national security issue.
Fei, the geopolitics or the semiconductors have been so dragged into geopolitics over the past few years, and there's been so many different things happening involving, in particular, the US and China, with many other key semiconductor players brought in to this geopolitical mix. The US has embarked on a strategy of three things, it seems. One is trying to cut off China's access to certain critical tools, certain critical semiconductors. The second is trying to invest via the CHIPS Act into its own domestic semiconductor industry. And the third seems to be striking up partnerships with allies, the likes of Japan, South Korea, and other places, in order to secure supply chains, work together on semiconductors, etc. But at the same time, the US is, more recently, there have been reports where they're suggesting they may expand some of the restrictions on China through a rule known as the Foreign Direct Product Rule, which would potentially mean some Japanese firms, even Dutch firms, may not be able to export some semiconductor equipment out to China. So it feels like between this battle between the US and China in semiconductors, there's a lot of countries, including Japan, that in many instances could be caught in the middle, where at the same time they're trying to have sort of alliances with the US. How does Japan, a country like Japan, sort of navigate these difficulties on the geopolitical level?
Geopolitics is always a concern for the semiconductor industry. Actually, the restrictions on imposed by the U.S. has already been in effect since last year, and right now, Japanese companies cannot sell the most cutting-edge semiconductors or chip-making tools to Chinese companies. And interestingly, before the restrictions came into effect, there was a huge surge of exports, Japanese exports to China in these two, especially in chip-making tools, because Chinese companies want to avoid the cost of these restrictions, and also they are trying hard to build its own semiconductor industry and to achieve self-sufficiency. However, back to Japan, Japanese government has already introduced a set of restrictions on semiconductor exports to unfriendly foreign countries, and so that includes over 25 different components and materials critical to chip making process. And Japanese companies, because of these increasing geopolitical rivalry between the U.S. and China and technological war and trade conflicts certainly will lose a part of the market. And however, they will explore or actively explore other parts of the market, especially given that many countries are trying hard to reshore or establish chip making capacity within their own soil or in friendly countries, and that will increase demand, not to mention the continued technological advancement in AI, in EV, and data centers. These will all amplify the demand for semiconductors and chip making tools.
Let's talk about AI then. How much of this revival is an urgency to be a leader in generative AI for Japan?
For Japan, in terms of the semiconductor sector, one thing is AI needs two kinds of semiconductors. Back to the basic. One is the logic chip processors, like the one right now designed by NVIDIA. And Japanese companies unfortunately have no capacity at the moment to make them. They want to be able to make them by the end of this decade, and so that they can benefit from the surge of AI demand. On the other hand, AI development and cloud computing needs a huge capacity of data centers, which requires a large amount of memory chips. And Japanese companies are trying to both develop their own capacity, but also attract foreign companies to establish fabs there. So Micron, the U.S. chip makers, and also Samsung has already established plans to set up either research centers or fabs in Japan to make advanced memory chips there. So the plan for Japanese companies is to catch up in this area gradually.
I thought one of the most interesting stories that kind of underlines Japan's attempt to revive this industry actually involves one of its most oldest and traditional companies, Canon. Obviously known for printers, known for cameras. I think last year they said they're trying to develop what they dubbed a nano imprint lithography system to rival ASML. Now, we've spoken on the podcast before a lot about ASML and their extreme ultraviolet lithography machines. They effectively have a monopoly on this market. Only one in the world that really can do these systems, required to manufacture the most advanced chips in the world. This Canon story is fascinating. As I mentioned, one of the sort of oldest, well-known tech companies in Japan, trying to reinvent itself as well. I guess, one, how likely is it going to be able to do that? But is this also something we're going to see other more traditional Japanese companies try to do as well? Japan has such a rich history in innovation, in technology. You think of the brand names that still survive these days: Sony, Nintendo, even Canon as well. What's happening in that kind of area?
Absolutely. I mean, Japan still holds a huge advantage in many niche areas in semiconductor sector, and in Japan is an active player in the precision equipment making and a lot of semiconductor materials. And back to the Canon's this nano imprint lithography technology is not new, actually, but they have somehow improved this technology so that it can be mass commercialized. However, I would say that they need to first achieve a certain degree of success rate so that they can be competitive to the existing leader in this, or dominate player in this area. And also, another thing is that many existing fabs, their design, their layout are purposefully made to accommodate to the extreme ultraviolet lithography technology. So some modifications might be needed, and these are actual costs for the players, existing chip makers. And so they will need to surpass this hurdle as well. But according to Canon, the main competitiveness lies in cheaper production cost and also less energy hungry. So that's two main attractiveness for their technology. However, I would say in general, surpassing the existing players is one thing, but more likely Japanese companies will use their niche technology and manufacturing techniques to collaborate with existing market dominant players and to explore market share and also to try to develop new technologies. One example is Sony, which is actually a big reason why TSMC decided to establish a fab in Kumamoto, is that they want to collaborate with Sony to develop image or next generation image sensor. And Sony is, of course, has its own technology there. But by putting together these two companies' resources and technologies, they want to increase their competitiveness against South Korea's Samsung Electronics. So by collaborating with international companies, domestic Japanese companies can leverage their existing technology and manufacturing techniques to expand their global share as well.
So we've spoken about, I guess, Japan's historical strengths, sort of the way that the global semiconductor landscape changed, and now attempts at the revival. So, and you've mentioned also the fact that Japan has some niche areas of semiconductor. Where is it particularly strong at the moment? Because we have spoken again on this podcast about how complex the supply chain is for semiconductors, from software, design, manufacturing, the materials in between, testing, packaging, everything like that. Where do you see Japan's strength at the moment? I know I was reading some sort of stats saying it holds an 88% market share globally for coaters, developers like Tokyo Electron and Screen Holdings, 53% for silicon wafers, 50% for photoresists. Yep. These are all very technical. So what do these all mean? Where are Japan's strengths?
Like I said, actually, Japan's strength lies in niche materials, components, and precision chip-making tools. And photoresist is a good example. Not only do Japanese companies, including one called Shin-Etsu Chemical, they dominate the global market share of photoresist as a material which is used in lithography technology, and but also the coating technology or coating technique to coat the photoresist around a wafer is dominated by Japanese companies, like you said, Tokyo Electron. So they hold up some niche areas or segment in the long semiconductor supply or technology chains, and they can utilize these kind of materials and chip-making technology and tools to their advantage.
You talked a little bit about how there's certain countries that are doing specific things within the supply chain and they're doing it really well, and Japan was sort of trying to do everything and not as well as other countries that were a bit more focused. Do you think there's a few particular areas where Japan should really focus their energies in terms of that supply chain in the development of semiconductors?
Yeah, I think there are certainly many things Japanese companies are looking at, but one thing that they need to fully take advantage of their existing advantage is these niche areas or segments in the semiconductor supply chains, and to increase international collaborations. But also, I think the thing that I mentioned is advanced packaging technique is one area that they can actually mark area for themselves and leapfrog existing players in the market, because right now the predominant technique is to use human powers to stack chips, and in this area China has a strong advantage. But many Japanese companies, they are trying to use automation technology to totally automate this whole process and to cut costs, of course, but also to increase the success rate by using precision tools and precise cutting and stacking technology. And these kind of things could be the areas that Japanese companies can make a breakthrough.
Fantastic. All right, well, that's all we have time for, but if you'd like to play Stat of the Week, I'll leave it to Arjun he likes to be a game show host one day.
One day. That's the dream.
That's the dream.
So contestants, we have
79.
97 billion
This is why I
US
like
dollars. 97 billion US dollars is the stat of the week. Fei, since you're our special guest today, I'll give you the first guess.
Is that cost required to make fabs by TSMC on Kumamoto?
Your guess, Tom?
Okay.
And I'll let you know after.
The estimated total investment that the government of Japan say will require to make 2 nanometer chip.
You're both wrong. I mean, those are far more interesting than my stat, to be honest, if we knew the stat for that.
Go on then.
It's the market cap, as of today, of recording 1st of August 2024, of Tokyo Electron, which was one of the big, obviously, Japanese semiconductor firms recently caught up in a...
So there was a period, right, where I actually got the answer to these for like 3 weeks in a row, and then since then Arjun's just like, I'm not having that.
Up the game.
The game.
I think I did it too easy.
I thought I was smashing it, and now I can't remember the last time I got one of these right.
Yeah.
So
Maybe next week.
maybe, hey, there's always next week.
There's always next
Good luck
week.
next week.
Good luck next week. Thank you very much. I'm going to need it. Fei, thank you so much for joining us. That's been that's been great. That's it for this episode. Before we go, please follow and subscribe to the show and leave us a review if you'd like. Thank you, Fei.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Arjun.
Thank you, Arjun.
Thank you, Tom.
We'll be back next week for another episode of Beyond the Valley. Goodbye.
Beyond the Valley.